PlayStation Minis, otherwise known to the community as Minis, were a line of games available on the PlayStation Store. The entire gimmick of these was that they were bite-sized, 100 megabytes or less, allowing them to be downloaded with ease. Sony also touted their minuscule size as a way to open the door to more developers. Indie titles weren't the only thing contained within the Minis line, as there were also a handful of big developers and some recognizable IPs, all out for a slice of the miniature pie. The line launched on October 1st, 2009 along the PSP Go, but they were not exclusive to it, as any PSP that had internet access could download them. This was around the time people were getting frustrated with the hefty price and comparatively small sizes of Sony's proprietary Memory Stick Pro Duo cards, so launching a line of itty-bitty games with a budget price was a welcome idea. Later on, support for them was added to the PlayStation 3, and the Vita launched with them available in its store. On July 14th, 2015, almost 6 years after release, the line was officially discontinued, having amassed 293 individual titles across all regions. For comparison, that's almost half of the 612 physical release titles for the PSP in North America. That's a pretty huge amount for such a micro-focused line. Now, this next part you need to take with a grain of salt, because I'm not 100% sure on this. I've seen it hinted at subtly while researching, but I believe that the Minis line was mainly handled by Sony Computer Entertainment Europe. Or at the very least, they were the main ones in charge of it. Most of the information regarding Minis I could find originates from the European branch. That's not to say SCEA wasn't involved, but from what I saw, they never really took the lead here. Europe also had a much larger launch lineup than we did in the States, and they have a lot more exclusive games than we do. It's also worth noting that, from what I can tell, the Minis line doesn't actually exist in Japan. There are some Minis titles that were released there, and some that were even developed there, but they've been completely stripped of their branding in that region. This kind of makes sense because in general, a lot of the titles in the Minis line feel very European. I think it's safe to say this was the European branch's baby. Again, take most of that with a grain of salt. If I could be honest, this was kind of a pain to research. The info is out there, but it's scattered, and some of the sources have conflicting information. I had to look deeper into this than anything I've had to research on the channel so far, and I really wasn't expecting it to be this big of a deal. I don't know why every time I pick something I think is going to be easy, I end up down some rabbit hole and things spiral out of control.
Please clap.
Anyways, before the PlayStation Store shut down, I actually had a handful of Minis. The main one I remember is Vampire, but I also had Xenonia, Dracula Undead Awakening, Tehra Dark Warrior, Hysteria Project 1 and 2, and a few others. I also specifically remember buying SAR Search and Rescue because I got confused thinking it was a Neo Geo Station title, but that's a video for another day. I've mentioned it on the channel before, but I didn't grow up with the PSP. I got one super late in its life cycle in 2014. But I did grow up with a DSi, and am very familiar with the DSiWare line, which as far as I'm concerned is the Nintendo parallel to PlayStation Minis. And honestly, I'm not really sure which one is better. Both are pretty similar in a lot of ways, with many games appearing on both services. Both also got a lot of iOS and mobile ports. I will say this, the Minis line overall got much better ports of classic games. A lot of those that came to DSiWare are kinda disappointing. I grew up with Rayman and Earthworm Jim, and while both have some nice quality of life changes, they are in no way close to definitive versions. I also grew up with these anonymous notes from the Abyss games that you could buy in separate chapters and transfer your items from one game to the next. They're dungeon crawler action RPGs. Sounds pretty cool, right? It is, until you find out they're just a cut-up version of this game with a bunch of mechanics simplified. There's a lot of DSiWare games that were like this, and I think it spoils the line's appeal a little bit. But not Minis. Minis may be small, but they are mighty. I've always wanted to take a closer look at them. There's one more that I used to own, and it was the first one I ever bought. Without further ado, let's dive into the Minis series. Mighty Flip Champs DX was unleashed upon the masses on July 12th, 2011. Exclusively in North America. This is a WayForward joint, so I knew it would be a pretty safe bet. This game was originally released on DSiWare, where it was being used as a test to see if they should keep making Shantae games. Thankfully, it worked, and we've been getting Shantae games ever since. This one initially seems like a weird choice for PSP, mainly due to the lack of a second screen. In the DSiWare original, all gameplay occurred on the top screen with the incoming layout appearing on the bottom. On PSP, both screens are placed horizontally rather than vertically, so all of your gameplay occurs on the left side of the screen. Also, the horizontal axis is the one being mirrored instead of the vertical one. I think this is pretty interesting because while it is unchanged from the DSiWare version, mirroring a different axis changes the way you think about solving all of the puzzles. It's kind of like the GameCube and Wii versions of Twilight Princess. Exact same game, but the worlds are mirrored. Both are worth playing, but if you really liked one, you should give the mirrored version a shot if you're hungry for more. And yeah, if you enjoyed this on DSiWare, you should play it here too. I'm not sure why they titled this version DX because as far as I can tell, nothing has been changed except the mirrored axis. Also, this is one of the most no bullshit games I've ever seen. It just straight up dumps you into the level select when you hit start. There's not even an options menu or anything, which I don't know if I've actually ever seen before. The rules are simple. There's no jumping and no enemies. Just swap between the two dimensions and make your way to the Frogman to finish the level. If you touch spikes or swap into a solid object, you'll die and have to start the level over. Once your animal friends start popping up in the levels, you'll have to collect them as well before you can exit. You can swap while on the ground or any time while falling in the air, which is really useful. Some levels also lock your swap to an automatic timer, meaning it's your job to make sure you're in the right spot before it swaps again. The game counts time elapsed as well as how many flips taken to complete the level, which factor into your grade at the end. Eventually, the puzzles start to shuffle between more than just two screens, and that's when the difficulty of the game really starts to ramp up. When that happens, you'll have to start thinking of your placement a screen or two from the one you're on currently. The music and sound effects here are also excellent and have that WayForward style. This game actually reminds me a lot of Mighty Switch Sports on 3DS, and given some stuff I saw them saying in interviews, I think that game may be the evolution of this one's concept. There's over 40 levels here, and while I typically try to see everything a game has to offer before I review it, that's not going to be the case here. I like games like this, but I work through them very slowly. It may be my ADHD causing me problems, but I started to feel a significant difficulty spike starting with the third world. 3-1 was very hard, but I eventually got an A rank on it once I finally beat it. But I ended up stopping my playthrough on 3-6, about 1.5 hours total of playing. That's totally acceptable for a micro review series like this. I suspect it would take around 3 to 4 hours for the average person to fully complete, which isn't too bad for such a small game. It's well made and it's worth checking out if it seems like your kind of thing. I'm kinda surprised they haven't bothered to port it anywhere else. I can easily see them combining both flip styles and releasing a definitive version for both PC and mobile pretty easily. And for a good game that led to the revival of the Shantae series, I think it's worth keeping accessible. The MINIS series. I briefly mentioned this one in the Sudoku Games episode, but didn't bother to talk about it along with Telegraph's Sudoku release. Telegraph has some other minis under its name, so we're going to talk about those on a different day. EA's Sudoku, however, was actually one of the line's launch titles in North America. Given that over here it was one of the first titles representing the line, how is it? The game itself is kind of like a slimmed down version of Carol Voderman's Sudoku, but with more Japanese theming and less minimalism. Soundtrack and sound design are decent, and I noticed the overall gameplay is very similar to Carol Voderman's Sudoku, in the sense that this one also lets you put in all 9 possible candidate numbers into one square, unlike most of the other Sudoku games we looked at previously. It only has a basic Sudoku mode with 3 difficulties. It's score-based, so anytime you screw up or use a hint, it'll detract from your overall score when you finish. Gameplay-wise, it's really nothing special, which is why I didn't go into detail about it last time. It does have some customization like Go Sudoku, however, and I actually got it to work this time. Basically, it can play any music tracks you have stored on your PSP as background music. I used this copy of the track Galaxy Trooper from Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 to test new PSP units I buy, so let's see if it can handle that. Well, it works, but it's slowed down a bit and doesn't sound right. I'm glad I got it to work this time, but I'll pass. Honestly, I'd consider this one a pass in general. It's not even bad, it just doesn't do anything that great. Its Sudoku interface is on par with Carol Voderman's Sudoku, which is honestly the best it could be, but it lacks all of that game's varied content. I guess it's good if you're hurting on space or really want custom music, but outside of those specific instances, it's not really worth having around. This one also got a release on DSiWare just a few weeks later that was accompanied by this completely ridiculous trailer. This version would be a total nothing burger. Except this release ended up being the very first DSiWare exploit. Thank you, EA. Very cool. That's all for now. Whenever I release episodes in this series, they're going to lack a proper intro like this one had. I'm going to be putting them all in a playlist, so they're meant to be watched all at once as one complete experience. I'll see you guys the next time I put one out.